Hey, what's up, y'all, and welcome back to On Your Mental. This is the podcast that shares candid, open, and sometimes vulnerable conversations between and about men. If you're not already, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. That way you know when new episodes are coming out. This episode, I've got myself, this guy, and then our friend Z, or Alex, I guess is his real name, coming on to talk about world events and how that plays into our lives. So I hope you enjoy today's episode, and we'll see you at the end. Peace.
No.
Like, we must have done something where you were invited, you just couldn't come.
Yeah, no, it was all COVID related stuff.
Oh, sure.
Because Dad was still working, and I didn't want to really do anything because he, was an old man, and also spread it around the hospital would be really bad.
Damn, super spreader,
yeah,
man.
so I was kind of being careful with regards to that.
That makes sense. Seb used to always get so sick. I remember that. Like, that was just like, I said he had the immune system of an unborn child. He would just always be sick in high school.
Unborn child.
Yeah.
I wonder.
They don't have an immune system.
I thought,
Would an unborn child get sick then?
Could it? If
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
like if the mother got sick, the kid
yeah,
could get sick.
but the mother's immune system's like boosted when it's
When
it's
they're vaxxed.
it's super. Want a super cool fun fact?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason why it's super good to breastfeed babies is because one of the things breastfeeding does is it puts some of the antibodies of the mother into the baby. So automatically it automatically provides some of the antibodies that protect from viruses in the area that the baby's born in. And they automatically have immunity to these types of things. Like, it boosts their immunity at a really young age.
Take this as a theory based off of that. That's fact, right? That's scientific fact.
Yeah.
Get this scenario. All right. That. So we have the healthiest woman on the planet, right?
Yeah.
All the antibodies,
Sure.
most antibodies you could find, and she gets pregnant,
Yeah.
bottles her breast milk, sells it for $500,000 a cup. You think you're getting boosted, or
Does that work the same?
carried through life?
if an
Would it
adult-
work on an adult?
Yeah, I don't know if
Theoretical, not that we're harvesting breast milk around here or anything, but would you is there a benefit?
I think
Drinking
it may
as an adult.
it may benefit Seb, but
Born guy.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's at a certain point you got all those antibodies already. That's why you're always sick as a kid, right?
I get it. You're new, right? You're new game.
Yeah,
So-
it's basically to give you a little bit of a head start
Okay.
when you're a baby. It's not like giving you immunity, but it primes your immune system a little bit for that
I
sort
gotcha.
of thing.
I don't know, man. I feel like there's definitely a market for it.
For breast milk?
Yeah.
I mean, if it worked like that, sure.
First off, welcome Alex to the home,
Thank you.
aka Z, aka Blue. There's so many nicknames.
I think sitting between Cabs and Rubes, the two. Wonder how he came up with those nicknames.
Yeah, right. Such a strange name over here. Fuck, man. Cabs and Rubes, creative nicknames. You're right. What I wanted to say, this is your first time here.
Yeah.
I was saying before we started recording, I apologize because I feel like that's almost my fault not having you here.
No, yeah. But I think it's mostly on me. I was wanting to be really, really careful with COVID and stuff like that, and I was invited. Don't get me wrong. So it's not for lack of invitation.
I
It was
swear to God, I care about my friends.
it was just abundance of caution. It was just
Yeah. I remember those days. It feels like it was just yesterday.
It's true.
Cool, man. Z, what have you been up to, by the way? Because I kind of am just curious about what you're doing with school, because you're doing your master's?
master's degree.
Shit, man.
I started in September. I got my master's in public policy and global affairs.
Interesting. Oh, interesting.
Played right into our trap.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know, but public policy and global affairs. Hey?
Yeah.
What's that coming off of with the bachelor's? What was the bachelor's in?
History.
History?
Yeah,
Cool.
totally sort of related. Not,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can be, right?
Yeah,
the
yeah.
way that the history plays into, I guess, how global affairs work.
Yeah,
definitely.
there's it's useful skill set wise, but not what I wrote papers on isn't going to be too much of a help, I don't think, but we'll
You
see.
never know.
Yeah.
What drew you to history, by the way?
Oh, I just I don't know. I always found it really, really interesting, and I think I I just sort of ended up doing it. I ended up taking a lot of classes, and then I realized I wanted to finish my degree as fast as possible, and that was like what I had the most credits for. And
I get what you're saying. yeah. Like I could do something else.
Yeah, but it might add another year, you know. And
nobody wants to do another year.
Yeah,
at the
time I was just not ready for that.
How does picking a master's work, by the way? Like, I don't understand, because it's a lot more specific than a bachelor's, right?
Yeah,
you get a bachelor's
for sure.
in history, and that's ridiculously broad.
But I mean, the thing is with the master's, mainly in the arts, but you can do it in the science, like not so much some sciences, but you can do it with engineering. I think you can really do like anything as your undergrad, and then you still have a lot of variety in terms of what you can pick for your masters. So any like art related masters, if I have the like required courses, and in this one there's only a few, and then sufficient like volunteering or GPA or whatever they want, you can do most stuff. It's easier to go into. It's a little bit more difficult if it's like a real specific research type thing, but mine isn't. Mine's course based, so it's kind of okay.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
So why what you chose?
I don't know. I just been interested in that type of stuff for a while, of like the global affairs and policy making, but it's also something that's pretty diverse in terms of what you can do. It's sort of like you can work in sort of any city, any place. It can be like a city level government, or it can be nonprofit or something like that. So I feel like from my personal life, in terms of what I want, it works really well for maybe doing something kind of interesting, something more exploratory when you're younger. But I kind of want to come back here. I kind of like, especially once I get a little bit older and stuff like that. So it's an easier job where I can also possibly settle down. It gives me a little bit of like both worlds I can choose. And then it allows me to sort of work into something I'm passionate about as well.
From hearing it like hit my ears, the idea of world
domination, you said?
Global affairs. Yeah, world domination. I mean, it's basically hand in hand.
It's same thing. Really, it's a different word for it.
You're so evil, man. I know it. Global affairs. It hits my ears and it makes me think like it can give you a like more worldly perspective of things in life if you're studying different cultures and things like that.
Different
things work.
Policy implementations and stuff like that. The public policy thing's the really like sort of thing that allows me to work at like a really low level or high level.
That's your bread and butter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you did a thing. Sorry, I'm asking like a bunch of questions just to catch up for me and for the audience here. You did something in Mexico a little while back too. Like you went to Mexico for like a work-related thing.
Yeah, that was a few years ago now. That was in 2018. Luckily, pre-COVID, because all those people who went for like 2020 got sent home and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was similarly related. It was related to like a small scale, like agricultural cooperative sort of thing that was being introduced into this like really small town in Mexico. And it was just sort of like we were doing a research project as to how like people were receiving it and stuff like that in that local area, which was really hard to do because they all spoke Spanish and we didn't speak a lot. But it was something similar. It was something related to that, like sort of global affairs, but at a real local level.
Cool. So the reason why I'm asking all this, just buttering you up for the real questions for today's episode. I see you as a particularly worldly person. I think that you have a good understanding of world history to some extent in certain areas.
Yeah.
I know you're not an expert, and that's not the point. But out of all of our friends, I think you know the most of like what has actually happened in the world and why things are currently happening as they are. Yeah, you do okay.
I would agree.
And you're allowed to be humble about it, but I genuinely feel as though you're the one who kind of carries us with knowledge. Like whenever we got a group chat going.
Yeah, we need like a big fact check.
Yeah.
I just see a whole bunch of ats.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, oh man, what is it this time?
Tell us why the fuck this is
If I may,
going on.
where did the nickname Z come from? Because I don't know.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I wasn't there for that. I wasn't there for Z. I was there for Blue.
He wasn't there.
He wasn't even there when he got the nickname. He just started calling him Z.
I think it was like Seb was there,
Yeah.
and then I think Troy and Donovan.
Yeah.
And they're all sleeping over at Donovan's house. This was like years ago. And they're watching Ants, DreamWorks Ants, and there's the character named Z, and Seb was like, "Yo, that looks like Alex."
I'm gonna put a picture up on the screen.
The funniest thing is like I didn't even know this until like a couple years ago. But like I had this nickname since like grade 8 or something like that. So just suddenly started calling me Z, and then everyone did, and I was like, all right, whatever. But like I didn't know that's why I had the nickname.
I love it because it's not even close to your name, completely unrelated.
And it's got the X. X can sometimes make like a Z.
Nah, man, not even close, dude.
And then Blue is like the same sort of thing. We were watching Old School at Donovan's house.
Okay.
And there's
You're my
Blue.
boy, Blue.
You're my boy.
Man, I've never been a nickname guy. I've never gotten nicknames. Rubes. That's it. That's just my name, short, right?
Your name in my phone is Ribbon.
Ribbon? No. Okay. My name in Seb's phone is Schmitty.
Yeah.
Because it's from New Girl.
Discord.
Schmidt.
Reek.
I don't even what's it even from? I don't even know.
Game of Thrones.
I don't know who Reek is in Game of Thrones, but that's me apparently. So today's topic though, we're talking about kind of how world events, I guess, can affect our personal lives here when we're so detached from them. I think that's kind of the interesting thing to me when I look at news, media, social media, whatever. So much is happening outside of your immediate circle. Let's say you shut yourself off from the world. You would have a much more narrow scope of what's actually happening. You know what I mean? If you didn't listen to the news, if you didn't open up your phone to check these things, if you didn't check your ads, how would you know what's actually going on, right? And so the first question I have is maybe just to both you and all of us to think, and like, how do you feel things like, for example, the BC wildfires that are going on, the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan at the moment, things about COVID booster shots coming up. How do you think hearing about these things plays into your day-to-day life and how you feel and think about those?
Well,
take it away.
Take it away.
If like for me personally, I mean the one that's different from all those is probably the BC wildfires, because in the case of me, my aunt and uncle live right near like one of the big ones, the Westwold Lake one. Yeah, so they were actually evacuated for a bit. They like returned home since, thankfully, but it's still kind of like they're on notice that they could be evacuated sort of thing. So I mean, I don't know, I feel like that, like I'm constantly kind of getting updates from my aunt regarding that, and for some of those things, like I feel like it's more personal. But to what you said about if you just cut yourself off, because I was camping last weekend and then like no idea that the Taliban was suddenly taken over in Kabul and stuff like that, right? No idea that these types of things were going on. So it is kind of interesting to cut yourself off and stuff like that. But I do think it can play into your personal life a little bit as just another thing that's sort of, stressful or makes you feel sort of helpless in that regard, right? It can be like if you just follow this stuff all the time, it can be like, it can be really bad. If like, and there's good news too, of course, but you don't usually get that as much. Yeah, like it can be just another thing that sort of stresses you out and plays on your mind constantly.
It can be more of a weight than anything sometimes when you're constantly running into this stuff.
Yeah, and you want to like you always waiting for an update and stuff like that, but it's world events take time when they play out. It's just I think it's just another thing that's often on your mind.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It just most of those things. Like, I would agree with the wildfire. Like, because it's in BC and it's so close, it makes it more real. Whereas those other things like the Taliban in Afghanistan or what was the other one? Well, booster shots are everywhere. But some of that stuff that you see on the news, it just seems like for me, it's almost like on another planet. Like it's interesting and it kind of keeps me engaged when I'm watching, but it's like it just seems like it's just so irrelevant. But at the same time, like some of that stuff, if you're tuning in every day, it is stressful. Like a lot of, like it makes me want to not watch the news or just kind of like I said, there's been so many times where I just want to delete my Instagram.
Yeah
Just because there's news everywhere.
Just shut this shit off. Look at what's in front of you sometimes.
Yeah, and just to constantly having the like if you have like the notifications on for this type of stuff all the time, it's definitely like
it's almost unnecessarily present sometimes, right?
Exactly.
And I don't mean to say this to sound as though we're discounting anything that's happening or downplaying it. It's all terrible stuff.
Yeah, but we're looking at this on like a mental perspective,
and from the fact of like like how it feels for an individual as well. How much it plays on your day-to-day life and whether And I think it is sort of risky. Again, like it is important to pay attention to this sort of stuff. But if it's all you pay attention to, it's something that's sort of a little bit more. There's nothing you can really do about it. And if you just constantly think about it, it's something that's going to make you feel very powerless in your day-to-day life, I
It's a little
think.
toxic even.
Yeah.
Now, not to disagree with you all, because I kind of feel the same way. I think I do feel the same way in that if you think about it and you realize the fact that you can't do a lot about these things, they're so out of your control. And then the more you look at it or read into it, it's hitting your mind in a negative way. To play devil's advocate, kind of.
Yeah.
Do you think it's bad to ignore it as well? Or would it be bad to just completely ignore it and shut it off, pretend like it's not happening?
I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I think one thing it would is sort of discount your opinion on some of these matters, right? If that makes sense. Like if that's the type of life you want to live, I also think it's, it can be very healthy if you want to do that, but it also does limit, I don't know, the scope of your opinion, if that makes sense. If you're not, if you're going to try and discuss something about it, right? That's sort of my personal opinion on it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what like that would look like in someone's life if they're to shut that off. But if they're not going to be like engaging in those conversations,
then why does it matter?
Then exactly, right?
Yeah, like if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, did a tree fall, right? If you're not educating yourself on this stuff or reading into it at all, but you don't engage in a conversation around it, who cares? Right. Why would it matter if you knew?
Yeah, if you're not talking about it too much, then yeah, it doesn't really matter. But I guess it could affect your like, I don't know, to go with a big scope thing. It could affect how you vote or something like that.
Maybe,
but but also I think
we got our election coming up. Shit.
Snap. Awesome.
Snaps.
For me, I think the reason why I think it's important to be informed is and just have a general awareness of what's going on, is because then you're not really letting one opinion influence your total viewpoint on something.
Sure.
Right? So if you're just talking with one person and they're like, hey, this is what's going on in Afghanistan, and saying like, oh, it's totally ridiculous and stuff like that, I feel like it could create a very one-sided opinion on something. And it's just a natural habit of people to have an opinion on something.
Yeah.
So I think the reason why it's someone's responsibility to have a general awareness of something is just because it prevents too much control from one source, or too much like being affected by one individual or one group of people or something like that. It gives you a little bit more, I don't know, freedom of opinion.
Agreed,
as well.
Yeah. Because like, even this is just an analogy, but like if you go on Instagram, you see like a news related post, maybe in the first few comments, there'll be a relevant comment about the post. And it'll be a whole bunch of likes on the comment of people that may not know like exactly what's going on, but that person just has an opinion. He's one of the first people to have an opinion on it. Yeah. And they get a whole bunch of likes, and it looks like this person knows what they're talking about, and it just kind of takes off from there. Right?
Yeah. And even in some cases with like the Instagram stuff, you just get a screenshot of like a reply to the article. You don't even get the article. You're just getting like a screenshot of that top rated comment. And that's, the person might be right, or, you're sort of just getting your viewpoint from a very narrow, like snippet of information, right? Which I think, all these things have a broader context, right? So I think it's just not like devoting your life to studying it, but just like having a general awareness of what the broader context is to be able to form a better opinion.
I agree with that. And I think that we're kind of touching on an idea of like information overload in some sense too.
Yeah.
Right? When you're taking in information from so many different sources and very frequently, it might be that you're just getting so much, and that's when you need to take a break, cut it off, delete the app, whatever it might be, to stop yourself. Because to your point about being first on a post, whether that's a comment or the post itself, I feel like a lot of media, at least what we consume as young adults, being social media, it's just about who's first to post something. You don't know if there's going to be like 100% accuracy to that post. You don't get the full context. It's just whatever's going to grab your attention first to get the likes and get you to look at that page, and then go from there. Thinking of, and you can maybe like educate us and the audience a little bit. I'm hoping that maybe you can, with what's going on in Afghanistan. when we saw those first images start to come out where it's showing everybody pouring onto the tarmac at the airport, people clinging onto the side of the plane, my immediate thought is, holy shit, like what is putting someone to a point where they feel like this is necessary? Because I didn't even know that the U.S. was pulling out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, I didn't know.
Being Canadian, that's not something that's on my radar.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it as the moment happens, and that's the news that we get. You know what I mean? Like that's my reaction is now all based on this snap moment,
Right.
where it's just the climax of events.
Yeah.
We
You're
don't
just
have the
seeing-
full story.
You're just seeing the desperation.
You're
of it.
just seeing the desperation. You're seeing the panic, and you're seeing the holy shit moment.
Right.
Right.
Whereas the background to that is much deeper.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
In
for
some
sure.
to some extent. Again, not an expert. But
Not
I'd
an-
love if you can like just educate us a little bit on
man,
like
all
what's
right.
going on.
So from what I know, and like I've done like look into this like a little bit. So
Little bit.
So it's my basic knowledge was that like the Taliban took over originally, I think in like I want to say like 96, 95. After the Soviet Union pulled out, they were sort of used Soviet arms and took over the country. And that's the reason why people are so terrified and so willing to get out is they've actually lived under Taliban rule before.
Right.
And it was very violent and very oppressive and stuff like that.
I have a quick question. Was that at the time when the Soviet Union pulled out, was that also then like a power vacuum that immediately got filled by the Taliban? Because
No,
they were,
not
like, in near
immediately,
power?
because I think the Soviet Union pulled out in the 80s and the Taliban didn't take over until the
interesting.
90s.
Okay.
So I think it was I think the Taliban may have had some, well no, they had their funding through exporting opium. I think that was where the bulk of their funding came from.
Interesting.
But no, like terrible rights for women in the case of like Afghanistan now, in some cases in what was U.S. held territory, you know, girls were able to go to school and stuff like that. That's not permitted, was not permitted under the Taliban. You know, things like women not being able to leave the house without a man, stuff like that. Very
Oppressive.
very oppressive, very draconian justice measures and stuff like that.
Cutting off a hand if you steal. I know that's a thing.
I'm pretty sure stoning was a thing as well
Yep.
for them. So I think that's why people are so willing to get out. As for like the U.S. pulling out, I mean, a lot of other countries, the UK, Canada included, haven't really had, you know, a military contingent in Afghanistan for a while. Like Canada hasn't been there since I think 2011. They've had, I think, special forces operations and training and, you know, assistance and stuff like that, but they haven't had actual like military force. So the U.S. has sort of been there alone. And this war's been going on for like 20 years now.
Yeah.
And they're sort of eager to pull out. What I think might have happened was in 2020, in I think February, the U.S. entered a talk agreements with the Taliban and the Afghanistan government and tried to have a peace agreement. And this was under Trump. Possibly because he wanted a big win for the election, possibly because he just wanted to end the war. But this peace agreement,
And he promised to take the troops out. Like that was
they
what his
would.
statement
So
was back then.
they would develop. Originally, it was supposed to be May of 2021. 2020, the Trump administration signed this deal with the Taliban and the Afghan government. So the Afghan government was aware of this, and you know, I'm really not aware of the particulars of like the military training and stuff like that. There's
You see all the videos.
Yeah, there's
you know what I
there's
mean?
some footage of like the Afghanistan soldiers not being very well trained, or you know, the equipment that the U.S. providing maybe not necessarily being the best, or that they, you know, that there was issues with interpretation and stuff like that. Again, these were a few years back. It's really hard to, because it's the same issue we were just talking about of like everything's coming at you so fast. Some of the stuff that's surfacing and being shared is like from 2015. You
Right.
know, which is a while back. Sometimes some of it even before, right? So it's hard to get, if you're just consuming it at like a really rapid pace, it's hard to get a full, you know, rounded perspective that's accurate, in my opinion. But so the Biden administration pushed this back even further, and then again, this happened last weekend. It happened in August, but the U.S. like military was going to pull out in September 11th, right? So it was still a month away, and they were they had such a small force. I think that the Taliban just started invading into regions that were just held by Afghani forces.
Because Kabul was one of the last.
It was
cities to be
the
taken
last,
over.
and it was because it's the capital, so it was obviously the best held region, and where the U.S. forces were still, because it developing proper defense, and also the embassy was there for the U.S. Right? So most of the military was centered around that, and I don't know too many particulars of like the Taliban's offense or anything like that. But yeah, suddenly the U.S. was pulling out at a rapid pace, and a lot of the people who were wanting to get out are people who worked with the U.S. government or the U.S. military. So the big one you'll hear a lot about is interpreters. The U.S. sort of used a very like boots on the ground method and got a lot of local interpreters to really help them win people over to their sides, and in exchange these people are often promised things like U.S. citizenship. Right. But with this happening so fast, I mean, these people are going to be executed if the Taliban gets to them and stuff like that, right? And in my opinion, this is why it's sort of important to be aware of what's going on, because this is sort of a promise that our government made to people who were helping us out, and then. Because the same thing happened with Canada. Canada also had interpreters and stuff like that. And I think that's why it's sort of important to be aware of it, because I think our government should be beholden to our promises, whether it's local or foreign. Right?
Yeah, your countries do play a role in this.
Yeah, so I mean, that's why I think like a bit of awareness is important to this sort of matter.
I agree. And that comes back to the main point of this conversation, which is that, there is a need for awareness.
But that's like... my very like short surface level what I know, and what my like some of it is my opinion, I'll fully admit.
So what happened to those there were initially peace talks between US and Taliban?
It was 3 parties. It was the US, the Taliban, and the Afghani government. Again, I don't know the terms of the agreement and if the Taliban just violated it by invading Kabul, but I think it was also expected that with the funding and training provided, that the Afghani government would be able to hold, and that might just not have been the case. Yeah, I've seen also reports of like, some saying that there was 300,000 Afghani troops, right, and others saying that those numbers are like really inflated. So it's an issue of corruption, whether or not it's
accurate reporting.
Yeah, the reporting was accurate and stuff like that.
Interesting. Well, Z, thank you for the brief recap here. Right. Very surface level, but I think enough to get a bigger picture of what's going on in a way.
Hopefully.
Help us be a little more informed. The thing that comes to mind now talking about that, and going back to your point, Kabir, of things being first on social media, I think it does play into what we take in as far as information, because people are often going to look for someone to blame as well.
Of course,
right? Immediately there's fingers being pointed. Who do we blame for this? How do I wrap my head around what I'm hearing and say, that's why it happened, this is where we went wrong? But with something that's been a 20-year war, and deeper rooted than that, as you pointed, that the Taliban has had a presence in Afghanistan for this specific example for many years prior to that, like, how do you point a finger? You don't. And so I think that's the danger with social media and how it's presented to us, is you get a ton of negativity immediately flooding. Biden's polling numbers are like ridiculously low now in the U.S. because people do not approve of him as president now because they think this is his fault. Right. But it's like he's been president for how long? And this was started by Trump, as you said, the negotiations to pull out. Yeah. But it's been a plan to pull out for longer than that. You're not going to stay in a country forever. Right? So it's so much more deep-rooted than that. And it's things like this, sorry to keep rambling here for a second, but things like this make me think that it can be dangerous sometimes to fixate on these kinds of things because it's so far out of our control. And not only that, but the information being presented back to us isn't the full picture. So you kind of have to be cautious about what you're taking in. Otherwise, it's just a flood of negativity, and that's what's hitting my head. You know what I mean? That's what I'm stuck thinking about, you know?
And again, like, I think that's why... I mean, looking at this stuff, it is going to be depressing, obviously, right? But I think being able to make sense of it a little bit, at least at least like maybe takes away the confusion or like the surprise of it and stuff like that. In 2020, not a lot of people, I don't know, knew about the government was planning to pull out, right?
So like that's not making the news. It's the oh shit moment. That's all you see.
So I think like if you make sense of it, at least it takes away the surprise of it, which I like for me is sometimes the worst part. You know, of like any sort of, whether it's a tragedy or whether it's just an event in life and stuff like that, is sometimes it like at least gives you a little bit of a broader understanding.
Yeah, I guess it's I don't know, getting hit by it in an immediate moment like that and not taking the time to process.
Like seeing the videos, seeing the pictures and stuff like that. It's just
fucking
like,
horrifying.
Yeah, exactly. It's just something that's suddenly like, where did this come from, right? Why is this happening?
I think I don't know if a positive is the right word, but something that events like these do for me is it makes me thankful for where we are. I cannot imagine living a life where I would feel like out of all the decisions I can make right now, holding on to a plane taking off is going to be the best one for my life for a chance of survival. That is terrible.
Yeah.
But that's what people had to do. I can't like imagine being in a spot like that. So it makes you thankful for where we're at. But then I'm confusing in my head the idea of almost like ignorance to these issues because I'm not aware of it until it happens. And then it does happen. And then it's like, how much am I educating myself? And it makes me think I don't have a very worldly view. I just take part in these conversations once it's happened.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, I think like at some point it is a matter of like just taking what you can get, right? Like if it is something where it's like, sure, it's not a positive, but it's kind of like, that makes you step back and appreciate what you have a little bit more. Sometimes you just got to take what you can get. Because we're all like one person, right? We're not going to go over to Afghanistan and solve this issue, you know? So it's something where you just kind of have to be aware that you've relinquished control. You have no control over this. And it's just something that, like, at least for me, this is what I find. Because, you know, sometimes when you get really into this stuff, you can get really down, right? And it is just taking a step back and just being able to appreciate what you have. I think that's sometimes the best you can do in these situations as well, right?
Yeah. Appreciating what you have is important, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It sucks that like moments like these are kind of things that make you appreciate it because it's just the flip side of it is devastation,
horrible.
sadness, like just a horrible moment for people, right? But yeah, you take for granted, I guess, the freedoms that we have here sometimes. You know?
Yeah, or just the peace of mind, right?
Yeah, the idea that is not going to happen overnight. One would assume it's not going to. Another question I have, and this is just food for thought here, is there is a phrase of history repeats itself.
Yeah.
You know, and so seeing things like this going on, I mean, for a while, what was it, a couple years ago, there were those tensions between, in particular, the U.S. and North Korea.
Yeah.
Remember there was talks like, oh, there's going to be World War III.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, when's that going to happen? There hasn't been a World War. I don't know the dates. What is it?
What, the last World War?
Something? 40
1945.
Okay, at least had the 40s. So there hasn't been a World War for 70 plus years.
Yeah.
Right? And is it possible for something like that to happen again? Like, do these kinds of events going on mean something else is going to happen next? Because I think of, again, to use the topic of what's happening in Afghanistan right now, yes, it's not the U.S. or Canada's responsibility to get back in there and do something about it, but in a way, maybe it is. You know, the U.S. started that, you know, for lack of a better word. They got in there. They went in there. And now they've left the country in a position that is very poor, not well prepared, not well protected, and a huge step backwards. So should they do something about it? What do you think? History repeating itself, it's a broad idea, I guess, but
something like that, either way, we're going to have to live with the consequences. And that's sort of what I like, for me, history repeating itself often is it's just living with the consequences of the previous event. Like all this stuff that happened, it's the previous like consequences of the last century, right? And like, you know, the Taliban even existing, it's the consequences of the Russians invading. It's just sort of like these things that sort of stack up and, you know, we constantly have to deal with. Is the Taliban going to start invading other nations? Like, again,
I guess we don't know, right?
Yeah,
we don't know with these things until it proceeds.
just also like FYI, these are all just me like spitballing as possible alternatives.
We're not experts.
Yeah, by no means. But it's, well, do they start invading other nations? They're saying the Taliban, because you can trust them for sure. They say they're going to be a lot more lenient this time and stuff like that. They've changed their policy. Maybe they're not lying. Just possibilities. Or maybe they do something similar to what they were doing before and are possibly funding terror organizations, right? Which is why the U.S. targeted them in the first place. I think it's just a matter of how people respond. I mean, people aren't necessarily going to support another war, in my opinion, unless they start to feel the consequences a little bit. So it's just a matter of like what it looks like. Yeah, that's sort of how that's sort of my stance on it. A lot of the issue is just how individuals are affected, right?
Right. Yeah, it's almost like there has to be buy-in for action to happen from a consequence.
Yeah,
has to be enough of a reason, I guess.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, like countries are ready for it to happen. Like their militaries
on standby.
Yeah, I mean, any country that would join in on this theoretical war, I think they would be ready, which is the scary part.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
You always hear like Russia's testing, I don't know, whatever, ballistic missiles or something.
Yeah, and it's always something else, something new.
I don't know, man. This stuff is
I don't know
so like it's so disconnected from our immediate reality, but still these events get you thinking about this kind of stuff sometimes. Right?
And I also think like, yes, the access to information we have is a lot greater and a lot faster, but I don't know how better informed we actually are, right? Because there's still all going to be that stuff that's you have no idea what's going on. There's some like place in the middle of nowhere where something you don't know about is happening or hadn't even thought of, right?
It's like clutter.
Yeah. So it's just sort of like there's always something happening, and it's just a matter of, will this be a big deal in 2 months? Will it just be like, oh yeah, that happened? I mean, like,
that's a feeling that I get. I don't know if y'all get that sometimes, where, especially in this day and age, information does move so fast that it feels like you forget about the things that had just happened.
Yeah.
Think back to the start of 2020, the wildfires that were taking over Australia. I forgot about that shit halfway through 2020, and it's because it wasn't in our backyard. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But
for me with
crazy.
2020, there was the when Iran shot down that passenger plane.
Oh my god, yeah.
And I was when that happened, I was like, all right, this is going to be the big one of the year. This is going to be the big event.
Kickoff.
Yeah. I was like, this is going to be the big event of the year when everyone looks back at like the year end. That's going to be the thing. I couldn't have been more wrong.
Swept under the rug.
And I feel like there's a part of today's media that plays a part in this. They make things a massive deal sometimes when we don't know yet if they are.
Yeah, they purposely
it's being there first. Yeah, it's just being there first.
Yeah. And to what Cab said, it's about being new. It's about being first, right? You're not gonna be first if you're spent 2 weeks working on this like new story about something, and then publishing it 2 weeks after the fact, right? You got to be first to the point. And I think there is a lot of people who do write really good stuff do a lot of really good research. But I think if you're just following the headline loosely, or like just keeping up to date with things, but not really doing too much of a deep dive into a lot of stuff, you do get swept up in that, and you can't really help it. It's just sort of like,
I feel like that's how misinformation spreads so often right now. I mean, to talk about COVID for a second, there's so much misinformation about it, and again, we're not experts, so we're not going to be disseminating information here, but there's so many different opinions about vaccines, for example. And if you just latch on to a certain piece of information, you go down that rabbit hole, that's now your belief. You know, that's your opinion too. And that's what you're going to latch on to. And that now formulates and hardens in your head to a point where you're blocking out other news sources.
It's crazy how stubborn people become.
Yeah.
Like just going down one of the many rabbit holes.
Yeah. And there's so many.
Yeah.
There's so many, and you'll feel like you're right the whole way through. It's crazy.
And again, I think all that's just sort of a response to fear in a lot of ways, right? I mean, I think one of the strongest reactions you can get out of someone is fear related, right?
Yeah, fear. Oh my God,
it's the easiest way to sort of, get someone attached. So if you have someone who's really afraid of like a certain aspect of COVID or whatever, like a lot of the misinformation, the government taking your rights away or something like that, and that's the big thing for you, it's very easy for it to become a dominant aspect in your life.
Yeah.
And I think going back to the point of like having a general idea of what's going on, I think that's one of the really important reasons for that, right? Is if you can dissect something and know a little bit more, it might make you a little bit less afraid.
I mean, this is why education is so important, and it teaches you to look, to question, to think for yourself, and look out for what else is out there. You know, I think that's one thing that is so horrible happening in Afghanistan is if they do go back to their ways of the past, where now they're not going to allow women to go to schools, that's so much more dangerous for the country.
Yeah. And it's just, again, it just becomes like one dominant like source of information.
Exactly.
And if you can't speak out against that, then there's no way to change. There's no way to grow. It's just sort of something that
That's
stops.
the only thing. That's the truth.
Yeah.
You know, thinking of world events in our lives, what's an event for you that has stuck out? I feel like it might be the same for all of us. I don't know. But I'm thinking of what I can remember from being born to now. The only event that stands out in my head is something that I feel like actually had an impact on our lives here, even though it was so far disconnected, was 9/11.
Yeah.
I think of 9/11 as like something that really changed the world as far as walking into an airport. Things were different overnight. You know what I mean? Things were very different. I can remember the moment as it happened. I see it happening on TV. My mom comes and like we were just watching whatever shit was on TV, like cartoons or some shit in the morning. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was before
It was
school.
on like every station.
Immediately
right?
it switches, right? Every single station was playing the same thing. You're getting those different broadcasts from CNN and whoever else, and you see the planes hit the tower, and it's like, holy shit! I don't know what was going on. I was a kid. I was 5 years old, right? So I don't understand what's going on. I don't comprehend it at the time, but my memory that attaches to it is seeing my mom just bawling, like devastated at watching what's happening and so scared. I could hear it in her voice. She's calling. I think she was calling her friend, and like you can just hear the panic.
Yeah.
But no sense of what it is. But still, we see ramifications of what happened 20 years ago today. If you go travel, you can see that kind of stuff still presenting itself in the airport. One thing, attached to it is it's like, this is where you don't know the consequences yet, or this is something similar where you don't know the consequences yet, and you can't predict what is going to happen later. History may repeat itself as far as these devastating things and consequences come from different actions and events, but you never can predict the next major one.
No.
Right? When they had people hijack a plane and crash it into Twin Towers and the Pentagon, you didn't predict that.
No, you couldn't have.
And then now they started looking at water bombs. You couldn't predict that until it happened, right? Until you ran into the first threat. And so it's almost like there's so much reactionary measure to predict or to these world events. But anyways, world events in your lives. Is there anything else that stands out for you?
And just to hop on what you said, I think like people are reactionary until something actually happens, right? And then you're like, some people try to take precautions, but then no one trusts until something actually happens. I think that can be a big thing. I'd say, I mean, for this century, I'd say the big three is probably 9/11. Because again, for me, that's the first world event I remember happening, right? You know, I have memories before it, all in my personal life. That's the first thing I remember seeing and like, not understanding, but it was the same deal. Like, you know, the TV was on before school and my parents were getting ready to take my brothers in and stuff like that. And then that happened. Yeah. Right? And like they stopped and they had no idea what to do and stuff like that. So the big three for this one, for the 21st century, I'd say, and then 2008 recession was another like big one that I remember. And then obviously like COVID was, COVID's the biggest influence on my life personally in terms of any like
you're currently living one
world event, but it's, you know, it's just sort of like the far-reaching ramifications of what's going to be happening like in 2040, you know, we don't know yet, right?
Knows?
We don't.
We don't. Yeah. You don't know, now you know. Yeah, you don't know.
Don't know.
Honestly, my memory's like pretty bad of my childhood. I don't remember.
Where were you on 9/11?
Whoa. On that point. But it did create like a lot of, you definitely create a lot of racism. I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indirectly.
I didn't mean it
but
like
yeah.
that. There's a joke where were you on 9/11? I swear to God. But yeah, yes.
Yeah. So
Huge.
I would say personally, just racism generally has had a lasting effect. Like it's got my attention just throughout at least the past like 10 years. So whenever there's some racially motivated attack or hate crimes, like hate crimes on African Americans that we see a lot in the States, on the news at least, and then the Asian hate crime that's been happening recently as well.
Since
Especially
COVID,
Yeah. So that's had the most effect on me. I'd say that's probably took up the most of my perspective on it.
The other thing I'd say that I think was probably like really like shocking for me and in our lifetime was the growth of like homegrown terrorism. So like there was the Pulse like nightclub shooting, there's like the Charleston, the race riots in Charleston, and the guy who drove the car into all the people, and like the rise of that, like the Pulse nightclub shooting was something else, but like there's a lot more like the white supremacist like related terrorism events, right? And I think that was something that was like, I never thought I'd see this again in my life, you know, like when we were younger, like the KKK was a joke. We thought they were like sort of gone, right? And it's just sort of like they
how
were
could that represent itself in the world today? But I guess it stems from all these events that I think they fuel racism.
They do, for
right?
sure.
When you think of 9/11, and this is going to sound shitty, but we're all friends.
Of course.
When we went on our trips to Mexico, right? Who are the guys that get pulled over in the airport for the extra check? It's the brown guys.
Yeah.
Right? Out of all the people in our group, they pull over the brown guys to talk to them. And it's like, oh, it's a random screening. Bullshit.
Yeah.
We're a group of 15 people and you pulled over the 2 brown guys and 15 people? Come on.
Yeah.
Right? So this stuff continues to
does.
present itself today. Right? And it's something that started 20 years ago, but it's just fuel to
it just created
be
so
there.
much fear that, you know.
And racism will absolutely be a topic that we address on this channel and this podcast at some point in more length and more depth. But I think all these different world events, you make a really good point here, Cabs. And Cabs got a good one.
Yes.
You make a really good point here where there is so much that people can latch on to, I guess, about these events that will feed into their own beliefs or their own hate and prejudice. And then it gives them a reason to stand on it and point their fingers. When 9/11 happened, everybody's now going to point at people from the Middle East and say, you're a problem.
Yeah. Or look at the person who looks like, you know, the person responsible.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's such horse shit. And you're going to look at the people did this at the start of the pandemic with COVID. You're going to look at people of Asian descent and say, you're the problem. You're from China. You're the problem. And that's bullshit. People are going to look at, after Trump was running his presidential campaign and talking all this shit about the Mexican people, he's now fueling hate towards Mexican people. So now anybody who's pro-Trump and also had something against Mexican people for whatever reason, now they got a reason to be backing themselves up. They've got the president of the United States on their side. These world events can fuel hatred, I guess, in some ways too. And I guess this comes back to what we originally mentioned about you'll see something that's negative on social media and it will feed into a certain perspective. It's going to add you another point of reference in your life to say, the way I feel is right, even though morally or worldly, those things are wrong.
Again, if you also get that confirmation, you know, like
confirmation bias, real thing.
And I mean, like people hear what they want to hear, right? And I think, I mean, every politician does it. Trump just did it with a very specific base and a base that got really riled up and, you know, had opinions that were the rest of the world didn't really want to pay any heed to because they were hateful in a lot of sense, right? I think it just it feeds into that.
I think that might be even another reason, bringing it back to what we were first talking about, another reason to be more informed about current events is if you're watching it and you're uneducated, you're uninformed about it, you're even quicker to jump on a conclusion, you're even quicker to jump on an opinion and latch onto it. But if you're more informed, you're going to have an open mind, right?
Yeah, man. It's a very broad topic, and I'll save the topic of racism for another time. I have many thoughts about my own position in a world of racism as a white guy. You know, there's this effect, and there's so much to talk about this, so I am gonna save it for another time. But it's like there's the whole white savior effect. Have you heard of that, or the white savior theory idea? It's the idea that you can't be an ally sometimes because you might be seen as a white savior, so that prevents you from wanting to be involved in these things or be a voice or advocate for whatever movement, right? Which I think is also bullshit.
I think it's bullshit,
right?
too.
Like just like support the right stuff.
People are complicating that way too much.
Exactly. And it's like to talk just for a moment about people having opinions who supported Trump. Their opinions are right to them. I personally don't agree with a lot of stuff that people were saying at that time, because to me it sounds fairly ignorant. All the stuff going on at those damn Trump rallies sounded ignorant to me. But you know what? That's from my point of reference. From their point of reference, what led them to that moment tells them that that's the right place to be.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say right and wrong, what's morally right and wrong to one person versus another. But I don't know, you work within your own realm, your own scope, and your own perspective, right? So to us, that shit's wrong,
Yeah.
Anyways, I feel like that's a good enough spot for us to kind of wrap up there. Alex, Blue, thank you so much for coming on, educating us and the audience here and giving us a little bit of background.
Opinion. Just gonna say again, not an expert by any means. But I mean, like, it doesn't hurt to like. I might be wrong about something, so like,
Yeah. Like,
look it up.
Full of shit too.
Look it up.
Thing.
Post in the comments below.
Yeah, look up your own shit. But that's the thing. Realistically, this platform, this is stuff that I support. This is stuff that I think is a relevant perspective to bring on here, and so we're biased in a way too, right? Nothing about what we're saying is the absolute right. There's nothing that is perfect about what we do either. But Z, I really appreciate your perspective and what you brought to the conversation.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course, happy to have you. Anyways, everybody, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, like it, leave a comment, whatever. I don't care. But at this point, we will see y'all next week. Peace.
Oh.
Jesus.